Hi, I'm Bonnie Johnston, the instructor for Manuscript Magic, a new revision program from WritingBlueprints.com which will help you take your story from good to great. In Manuscript Magic, we talk a lot about revising at the scene level, so I've prepared a short video for you that talks about what a scene is and how you can identify scenes in your manuscript. I'm so excited to be able to show you the inside of Manuscript Magic. We're going to do that on February 13th at the VIP launch webinar. I hope to see you there. So what is a scene? A lot of you probably have an intuitive understanding of what scenes are, but I wanted to talk about scene a little more formally in the context of how we're going to look at scenes during the editing process. A scene is a unit of change in a story, and scenes, of course, are the building blocks of stories. We're going to define a story as a series of events that shows the reader how a character changes or experiences meaningful change. A scene is a passage that starts with a problem, has rising action or escalation of conflict, and ends with a climax that may or may not resolve the conflict or the rising action. In other words, scenes are miniature stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you have a unit of the story structure, but you're not showing something meaningful changing in the course of that arc, that means you don't have a scene. You have a series of events that can be deleted from your story, because every scene in your story must advance the plot. And by advancing the plot, we mean we show the reader a meaningful change. A scene usually takes place in one time and place, and if you're writing in limited third or in first person, through one person's point of view. The rule of thumb is that whenever you move to a new time or place or switch to a different point of view, you start a new scene. It is a rule of thumb. There are times when you don't do that, where you have a transition. You say 3 hours later, they were at school again. But you're still in a scene because you're still working through that rising action that's going to take to a climax and address one particular conflict or one particular change for your characters. So most of the scenes in your book probably have scene breaks between them, unless you're writing picture books. But there will be some places where the scenes do not have breaks between them. For the sake of pacing or for the sake of flow, sometimes we stitch scenes together with transitions like this. You'll have a scene where Erica is doing something, and then you say, later that night, Erica crawled down the drain pipe and snuck into the treehouse, and then you'll have a completely different scene that happens in the treehouse. And this doesn't change the fact that you've still got two separate scenes with their own arcs, even though they're stitched together and there's no break between them. So I just want you to be aware of this so that you don't get confused when you're trying to identify where the scenes are in your story. And this might seem like a minor distinction to you. To readers, it is a minor distinction. They don't care where the scene starts and where it ends, as long as they're enjoying the story. But when you're editing, the most efficient way is to edit one scene, structural scene, at a time to make sure that each of these little mini story arcs that make up your overall story are in good shape. So if you try to analyze two scenes that have been stitched together as if they're a single scene, it becomes more confusing. You're trying to tackle two different story arcs or two changes that are being shown to the reader and looking at them as if they're one thing. And that's the main reason you want to understand this distinction, is so that you don't get confused when you're trying to figure out if your scenes are working or not. And if you're not sure whether a sequence of action is one scene or multiple scenes, you can ask yourself, does this passage deal with one primary conflict or show one thing changing? If it deals with two or more, it's two or more scenes. So if you're looking at two or more scenes that have been stitched together, leave them. Don't worry about adding scene breaks. They're fine, probably fine the way they are, because you put that transition in there for a reason. But just be aware of them, that you're going to have to look at the first part and the second part around that transition as if they're two separate scenes with two separate arcs. Now, picture books are a little bit different. One page of a picture book can be a very compressed scene, or a sequence of pages, one conflict in a picture book can be a scene, or your entire 24-page story can be a single scene. So that gets a little bit harder to see Like, do I treat this as all one thing, that all 24 pages is my whole story a scene? Or is this broken up into 3 different sequences that I need to analyze as scenes? Is every page a scene? I just want to give you an example of what it looks like when every page is a scene, just so that you can see how this works. We're going to talk more about scene structure in a lesson later, where it's going to become more obvious, but just to kind of give you an idea here, this one page of a picture book could be considered an entire scene in terms of how you're analyzing the action. How do you run so fast? Asked Turtle. That is a scene opening, and it's a suspense hook. It's a sentence that raises a question for the reader. I have big bouncy paws, said Bunny. Your paws are small and silly. So that's an escalation of conflict. We've just basically told Turtle that he doesn't have what it takes to run as fast as Bunny. Not fair, Turtle thought. I want bouncy paws. So that's the closing hook of the scene. We're ending with Turtle's reaction to the fact that his paws are wrong, and we're ending on that strong emotion of envy. So the scene, you always want to end on a strong emotion, whether it's the character's emotion or the reader's emotion. So that's an example of how one scene in your picture book might play out on a single page.